Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I am Braden. This guy right over here is Tim, and this is the Second Legacy. And thank you so much for stopping by. Now, you may have seen us each on our own channels, Military Arms channels over there and Langley Outdoors right here, but this is Second Legacy, and this is a new channel that we are collaborating on to pass the blessing of the Second Amendment along to the next generation. The entire point of this channel is where Tim and I break down in a little bit more depth, a little bit more detail to give you the answers, give you the conversations, and really give you some points to bring people over to our side, because at the end of the day, that's what we need. We need to bring more people into the fold to pass the blessing of the Second Amendment on to the next generation. So if you would like to see this grow, if you like this content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn the notification bell on. We have seen some amazing reception, and we would love to see more. And thank you so much in advance for checking that out. But today's content, we are going to dive into something that's always weird. When you dive into these articles, when you're looking in the gun control world, you're looking up what's going on in our gun rights versus gun control arguments, and you see leftist organizations start to throw gun control under the bus, that should set up your hackles. Something's off, and that's what we're going to dive into. So before we get to the topic, Tim, good morning, good afternoon. How are you doing?
Good morning, sir. I think it's still morning. Yeah, we're still in the morning hours. Doing great. And, it's really, really interesting when we see, the anti-gun forces talking about their gun control bills. And you even have, proposed ATF directors who are no longer employed talking about it. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's article. And This is pretty darn interesting for sure.
Oh, absolutely. So without further ado, we're going to set this up. I'm just going to lay it out. I'm going to show you what this is angling towards. And then Tim and I are going to break it down, because there's always more under the surface. So Mr. Producer, if you could hit number one, I'd appreciate it. FBI gun seizure orders from people who fail background checks hit historic rates. Now, right out the gate there, you would see one of two things. You would either say, whoa, has something happened where there's more gun seizures than ever before? Or is the background check failing? Either way, this is a very clickbaity title. But what we've got to dive into here is the details in specifics. This is where it all dives in. So, Tim, off the bat, if you're going to guess, what do you think that would angle towards? What would you expect them to put behind that?
Well, it would seem from the title of the article that they're trying to scare people, like, oh my gosh, all these guns that have been sold during the last few years, man, there's just been this huge uptick in the seizures of firearms from people that shouldn't have them. And we're talking about 5,000 to 6,000 people and roughly 39.6 million guns sold. So if you break that down statistically, and it's been a while since I had to math, but I'm guessing that's right about 0.1%, not 1.0%, not 1%, 0.1% of the firearms transferred. I mean, we're talking about a handful. We couldn't get any closer to a statistical zero without becoming a statistical zero. Yet reading the title of this article, boy, it certainly seems like the sky is falling.
Oh, absolutely. And if you guys do not believe us without anything, we bring receipts. Check this out. Mr. Producer, could you hit number 3 for me? More than 6,300 such referrals were transmitted to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives in 2020 to take back weapons from buyers who background checks later determined they may have been ineligible because of criminal records, mental health histories, disqualifying military service records, and other bans, and an additional 5,200 in 2021. So before we go to the next slide, keep that in mind, 6,300 and 5,200. Mr. Producer, if you could hit number 4 for me. We're going to show you what Tim was referencing. This is the background checks, the ones that have been run from 2000 to 2021. Keep in mind, 6,300 that they're citing in 2020, 5,200 in 2021, 40 million here. And Tim wasn't making that number up. He can still math. It is 0.1%. So that brings the next question. If the BS is this blatant right here in the front, where are we going? What is the point of this article? Why would people who have been aligned to gun control in perpetuity be undermining the gun control system, of which they're constantly asking for even more? That's where we're getting. So, Tim, take us to the next part. I know you're ready for this one.
If we bring up number 5, Mr. Producer, the numbers follow years of surging firearm sales, yet they also underscore a long-standing tension in the system. Federally licensed dealers are permitted to proceed with weapon sales in cases when background checks are not completed within the required 3 business days. And so I think we're all familiar with the process. Anybody that's done a 44734 form, purchased a firearm, you know the process. You go in, you fill out the paperwork, and then you have to wait for an approval. If you don't get an approval immediately, which is supposed to happen, you can be delayed up to 3 business days. Doesn't count weekends, doesn't count holidays, and many times this winds up being most of a week. Mm-hmm. And so they're claiming, well, first of all, I want to go back to the previous slide where they're talking about barring people that may, the operative word here being may, have criminal records, may have mental health histories, and may have disqualifying military service records and or other bans. And what are these other bans? Well, in the state of Indiana, which we've talked about before, if you're going through a divorce, chances are if you're the male, you're going to get slapped with a protective order. You're going to get slapped with that protective order that will cause you to get denied when you go to purchase a firearm. So how many of these transactions are soldiers that may be dealing with PTSD or being diagnosed with PTSD? How many of these how many of these bans or prohibitions on purchasing were made because of incomplete or inaccurate healthcare records or other bans like I just mentioned, protective or orders of protection? It seems that they're really grasping for straws just to get to 5,000 to 6,000 guns retrieved. Yes. And again, it seems like a really minimal number, given the fact that as we were looking at that bar graph, how we went from, just into record gun sales over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. And there's a couple of things that we're seeing there. And I think this is of interest, and this kind of diverts just a little bit. But if you look at that constant upward tick, and then you take a look at 20 and 21, massive spikes, why are we seeing an increased number of gun sales? It's because Americans are becoming distrustful of their government and politicians. It is it's this concern that our country is going in the wrong direction. Crime is on the rise. We have activist DAs and prosecutors going out there, letting violent criminals go back out onto the street, either under their own recognizance or giving them something like $25 bail. We have this cashless bail thing that's been proposed in many of the big cities. But all this crime and instability seems to be happening in areas that are predominantly anti-gun, that have really strict anti-gun laws on the books, at least at the city level, if not the state level. And so we're seeing this uptick in gun sales because of this distrust in government, the fact that we're going the wrong direction. Crime is surging, and it's not because of the firearms as the anti-gunners would want you to believe. It's because of policies these politicians are implementing. And so then it all falls back into the discussion we're having today with this whole background check system. It's a fraud from the beginning. And it seems, again, that they're just grasping for straws to try to get as many of these guns confiscated as they possibly can. But it certainly doesn't seem like the numbers are very, I don't know. Well, the numbers are actually quite telling.
Yes, no, 100%. And if you guys were just listening to Tim saying, no, that might be a little extreme. Like what? It can't be that serious. Mr. Producer, if you could hit number 6 from the same article, the 3 business day deadline for background checks examiners does not account for the crushing volume of transactions that increases almost each year, he said. Who's he, you ask? It's Mr. David Chipman. Quote, this is a security system set up in such a way as to not inconvenience gun buyers and sellers, Chipman said. There is no other security system that I'm aware of that is set up this way. Think of it. The TSA was set up to prevent another 9/11, but the nature of that job requires putting people at some inconvenience. That guy was almost the director of the ATF. Biden put him in, and he did not get past Democratic and independent senators for confirmation. That's probably a part of the equation right there. This guy's a senior advisor for Giffords.org. He's openly saying, well, yeah, but for safety's sake, for order's sake, a little inconvenience for your rights is totally worth it. Look at the TSA. Even though the example he throws out, flying on a plane is not a right in our Constitution, it's a privilege similar to driving a car, which is something else they like to liken these things to. But the whole point here is, for a little inconvenience, what's 3 days? What's 10 days? What's 20 days? You know what? What's 6 months? Let's go the Canadian model. After all, it's safety, even though Canada is continually banning guns even after all those implementations.
Yeah. And what's interesting about Mr. Chipman is here he is doing his best David Hogg, trying to walk back his extreme gun control proposals because, and that goes to a Hogg tweet that just recently happened where he said nobody should own a gun. Now he's trying to walk that back saying, okay, now that I got your attention, let's see if we can meet somewhere in the middle, because he got lambasted for it. Well, Chipman's no different. Here's Chipman is a man that literally thinks a minor inconvenience to your rights is an outright ban on the Second Amendment. the man thinks all guns basically should be banned. He might allow you to have a flintlock or some sort of a muzzle loader, but he certainly doesn't want you to have anything modern that may load itself or feed from a magazine. And he probably has a problem with revolvers and lever actions too. The guy is rabidly anti-gun. And so his comments are kind of comical because once again, he's trying to play this intermediary where he's not really this rabidly anti-gun person. He just wants reasonable restrictions and minor inconveniences, keeping in mind what his idea of a minor inconvenience is, once again, a complete ban on your Second Amendment rights.
Oh, absolutely. And not, I mean, and even not to that extreme. Let's just stay right on what he's talking about here. Well, yeah, 3 days. So why the whole point of this video, why are they throwing the background check system under the bus and then all of a sudden shifting energy directly to that 3 day waiting period? It's almost like that was the point. Undermine existing systems in order to get more systems, even though, which we're going to hit in a second, the existing systems were put in place by the Brady bill, followed by the Nix bill in the 90s. All of these things were, what's the word? Not coincidences. Oh, goodness gracious. When they're all coming together and it's all for the good. I cannot remember the word to save my life right now.
I can't help you there.
Oh, dang it. I'll come to it in a second. But let's go to the last one, and then we're going to hit some countering points. Number 7, Mr. Producer. Compromise was the word, by the way. Quote, one thing that could be done that doesn't impede anybody's right to own a gun is to extend that time period. But you look at that, Morris said, adding that the Bureau will likely face never-ending staffing challenges to meet the demand. You cannot staff your way out of this problem. This is a former sitting director of the FBI. Now, I find extreme irony in that statement because the same people who are advocating for this as you just can't staff your way out of it, it's just impossible. The only way is to extend the waiting periods are the same people who just hired 87,000 IRS agents to staff their way out of that revenue issue. The duplicity never ends.
It's insane. And you set it up perfectly because we see this time and time again. We see them push for gun control. They get their wishes, they get their gun control, but then it's just not enough. We got to go back to that well because it just seems like this gun control just simply isn't working. So instead of trying something different, naturally we just implement more gun control. If a 3-day waiting period isn't good enough, by golly, it has to be a 5-day waiting period that's going to work. And if that 5-day doesn't work, then we'll move it to a 90-day waiting period. And if that doesn't work, we'll move it to a 10-year waiting period. And then we'll move it to a 50-year waiting period. At some point, this has got to stop. We just got to keep passing laws.
Yep.
Their goal here is the same, and they're just trying the incrementalism route. And we've talked about incrementalism in the past, and what that means is they're just going to chip away piece by piece at our rights until they get where they truly want to be, and that is a complete ban on your Second Amendment rights. So they're going to constantly keep coming back to that well. They're going to say, well, this law we passed just simply didn't work, so we got another law waiting in the wings that'll definitely fix it. And when that doesn't work, I guarantee you there'll be another law. And when that one doesn't work, there'll be another law. It's a never-ending game of this incrementalism pushing towards that end goal.
Oh, you could not have said that better. In fact, now's the part where we actually go to the history. So you guys have these conversations when they say, well, prove your point. Here you go. Mr. Producer, could you please hit number 8 for me? This is from the NRA, so this is historical. They were around then. Waiting periods were once part of federal law mandated by the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act of 1993, but only until the National Instant Criminal Check, NICS, came online in 1998. The 5-day waiting period mandated under the Brady bill was replaced with the instant check system. So that compromise that was put in to get Democratic senators or Democratic House members over was that mandatory escape valve of 3 to 5 days. That was the entire purpose. But now let's go to the next statement here. While most checks are instant, the FBI actually has 3 days to complete the background check before the transfer can proceed. The investigation can continue well past 3 days, and in cases in which the firearm was transferred after the 3-day window, the case is referred to the ATF for retrieval of the firearm should that investigation continue. Now, right there is a perfect example of what Tim just said. They are going to incrementally do this, and that's what you've seen in gun control across the board. You could look at any state currently. You could look at the 1993 Brady Act and then the Nix Act. You can look at Colorado right now. First, they repealed preemption 2 years ago. Then they came out with magazine bans, and now they just introduced assault weapons bans. Washington State did the same thing. Illinois did the same thing. New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Connecticut, they all do the same thing. It's never enough because the problem's never solved by the gun control that they propose. That's the point.
Yeah, they don't want it to work. They know it won't work. They don't want it to work. And it's kind of ironic that the NRA chimed in on this, talking about the NICS background system, because we have NICS thanks to the NRA. We have fixed NICS thanks to the NRA. NRA has been pushing these gun control measures for a long time. And it's just so funny to see them chiming in on the matter. It's almost as if they're relevant because they're, they're the biggest bunch of grifters out there, but I don't want to get too far
you mean
down
they're
that
not? You
path.
mean they're not relevant anymore? I thought they
No.
were like the gun. I thought they were the gun lobby that literally owned Congress. I thought like literally
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
it.
yeah.
That's what they
And
told them.
David Hogg wants to debate Wayne LaPierre because he's so
Yeah,
relevant. What's he going to ask him about? His
sitting on his
$40,000
pillows.
suits? Yeah.
Oh yeah, sitting on Davy Hogg pillows like some little hippie commune. 100%, it'll be great. It's
So it,
that was
it,
fun.
it was fun. A little bit off in the weeds there, but definitely fun.
Okay, it was great.
So bringing it back. So once again, we see gun control simply not working. We see the ATF complaining that it doesn't have the resources it needs because, they have more important things to do, like what they were doing at Ruby Ridge and Waco. They have all these things they really want to do, but gosh, their resources are just too strapped. And so they're always going to have their hands out for more money. They're always going to look for more gun control. They're always going to keep pushing this narrative that your rights are too dangerous for you to have. And to save the world from you and your rights, we're just going to have to put these minor inconveniences on you. We're just going to have to impose these reasonable restrictions that never seem to bear fruit. And they're always imposing more and more restrictions and passing more and more laws, and they never seem to get where they want to be. And that's by design.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the arguments in wrapping this whole thing up, I've got one more piece of conversation for you because this is per the ATF's own statistics. The average time to crime for firearms traced by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives in 2018 was nearly 9 years. So the idea that guns are often used in crime of passion or impulsive actions right after purchase is not supported by anything other than anecdotal evidence. And that's one of the main points that you hear. And again, going back to the whole point of the second legacy, you're going to hear these arguments. This is how you counter them. Well, guns are purchased in record deals and things go wrong. Not until 9 years after, or worst case scenario, it's actually decreased 7 years in the most recent statistics. The point is, it's still years. It's not minutes. It's not hours. It's not weeks. And that's the important piece. You can counter all of these gun control parts just by having the data. And that is what this channel is all about.
Yep. And it goes to the point that the background checks are completely useless. And this is something we knew even when it was being proposed back in the day. First of all, you have incomplete, inaccurate records. Almost all the denials or delays we get at our store are based on bad information. They weren't justified. So it's almost always wrong when it does happen. And the few times that it actually, catches a criminal, it's so insignificant in terms of the number of people that it's not even worth mentioning. Again, it's a statistical zero. And so, even though the NICS is here, unfortunately, to stay forever, there's no politician that's going to argue that the NICS should be undone because it just seems too reasonable to most people. But the fact is, it doesn't do what it's supposed to. Criminals don't go to gun stores to buy guns, generally speaking. They get them through illicit means. They steal them. They get them, in backroom deals and in alleyways and stuff like that. That's why you see 7 to 9 years from the time somebody purchases a firearm before it's ultimately used in a crime. And this, again, is a very small percentage of the guns that are actually purchased, a statistical zero. But that's how criminals get their guns. They're not going in, filling out 4473 forms and doing background checks because they're most likely already known to be criminals and they don't want to get charged with a federal gun crime. So they're just going to get them through illegal means. That means all these gun control measures only affect the law-abiding folks watching this video. You're the person that's affected by these gun control measures. You get delayed, you get harassed, and you don't get to pick up your property and exercise your Second Amendment rights because you have to jump through all these loopholes that don't even do anything to prevent or stop crime. But it sure feels good, and that's the whole point. It feels good, and it gets them to where they want to be, which is a ban.
I mean, you're not really wrong. It's one of those things that I think you said something to kind of wrap this conversation is so important to understand is there's a difference between where the population is and where that constitutional line is, right? We have 100 years of gun control and using common sense measures. And I think something that you said a bunch that has that really has a lot of importance is it was incrementally rolled out. It has to be incrementally rolled back. And I think to your point, the Nix background check system, there are so many things that they're pushing beyond that. I think curtailing the assault weapons bans that are consistently happening, the magazine bans that are consistently happening. I don't know, the ATF's new rule against pistol braces. I think those things they've stepped so far, and there can be public support to quickly get those back in order or back in line is probably the best way to say it. But to your point, Nix is one of those things where it was implemented about 30 years ago now. That's a longer reach. So don't focus on, hey, let's get rid of that piece. Focus on the things that are coming down the pike now that we can affect incrementally, and we will get to the point where we are in the right spectrum, if you will, if that makes sense. At least that's my perspective. We'll get there. It's just going to take time.
Yep. And I think that's a great way to wrap up today's episode is that, as Braden said, folks, we didn't get here overnight. It took decades of incrementalism to get us to where we are. And it's going to take decades to unravel this mess. I mean, I'm just like you. I wish I could snap my fingers and make these ridiculous laws go away and people would wake up to the reality that they're just absolutely ineffectual. But that's just not going to happen. That's not how it's going to work. We're going to have to remain dedicated. We're going to have to resist the temptation for immediate, fixing of the encroachments on our Second Amendment rights and realize that we're in this for the long fight. We need to take the information that we're sharing with you guys here on the Second Legacy, take that information and use that in conversations going forward with coworkers, friends, family, and show them how these laws don't work. Show them how our Second Amendment rights are instrumental to maintaining our freedoms as Americans. And then over time, we will win. And we are winning. We've been winning for decades. Mm-hmm. It's just we're using the incrementalism tactic against those using it against us. And we can expect the same results. It's going to take a while to get there. So be patient, be vigilant, keep fighting, and keep watching the Second Legacy. We thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you guys soon.